If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Dr. Price, last final chunky question here, if you will, by our friend Dimitri. It's kind of thick here. It's got a lot in one. Why does Dr. Price believe that certain Jewish patriarchs are meant to represent certain deities? In other words, how did we get from polytheism to Judaism we know of in antiquity, and how did Jehovah rise to prominence? Also, it seems to me that Jews of that day were more open to syncretism, so how did they reconcile the beliefs of others with their own beliefs? What does Dr. Price think about the concept of henotheism? Is the term useful in this context? It appears that some Jews turned other gods into angels or fallen angels, although I'm not sure. But if it's the case, why would they do this? In addition, what about the myths in the Torah influence directly like the Book of Enoch? Anyway.
What's that very last thing? I missed the last sentence somehow.
In addition, what about the myths in the Torah influence directly like the Book of Enoch? Kind of a, I don't know.
Oh, okay. What sort of things were based on the biblical books? Let me just deal with that first. It's not clear that some of these books are rewrites of Genesis, though some of them, like the Book of Jubilees, may be. It may be that they're writing a kind of paraphrase, almost a targum. They were Aramaic paraphrases of the Hebrew Bible for Jews who no longer knew Hebrew anymore. They would hear it read in synagogue, but this was like a living Bible kind of a thing. Well, the Book of Jubilees and some others might have been rewrites. The Genesis Apocryphon, so-called, is a kind of retelling of this and makes explicit certain things that some readers thought were implicit, like a miraculous birth of Noah, indicating that he was a kind of a demigod, one of the Nephilim or something. Because otherwise, why was he the only righteous man on earth? He must have had something extra going for him, and so forth. So some of it was, but also, as Margaret Barker and others point out, things like the Book of Enoch may have independently preserved a lot of earlier versions of things like the Eden myth of sons of God and daughters of men and so forth that have been severely edited and chopped before they went into Genesis. It looks like there's a version of the expulsion of Adam from Eden in Ezekiel chapter 14 that had more to it than the Genesis 2 and 3 version did. So it's hard to say. It may be that there were other parallel versions, more elaborated versions, or older but less edited versions that survive. You really have to do a really close reading of them to come up with what you think was the original. As to the development of theism, it appears that the early Israelites were simply Canaanites. There was no entry into Egypt and no exodus from it. There was no conquest of Canaan. They simply were Canaanites, as the Bible itself already implies in Genesis when it says that their patriarchs of the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, etc., their progenitors were all brothers or cousins of the sons of Abraham and so forth. I mean, that's already saying, yeah, we're part of one big ethnic genealogy there. Well, yeah, you can tell from the similarities of the languages, like the Canaanite language we now call Ugaritic because it was discovered in ancient Ugarit when they did excavations there, also called the Ras Shamra texts, these tablets that told us a lot about Canaanite religion and language. So you can see it's almost the same as Hebrew. It's like Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Ethiopic, Armenian. They're all Semitic languages like Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, pretty much. Well, they make it clear that Israelite religion was virtually the same as Canaanite religion. Some of them even had the same names, like the highest god in the Canaanite pantheon was El, which is the same as El or Elohim in the Hebrew Bible. His son was Baal, and which means Lord, and he was sometimes called Yahweh, that is in our letters, Y-A-W, and so forth. And there are similar stories about how Yahweh and Baal were storm gods, and the whole thing just so similar. It's hard to deny that it's just like the difference, quote unquote, between Zeus and Jupiter, between Greece and Rome, just other names for the same deities. Well, Israelites were polytheists. They had several gods they worshipped, and several of them survive, though translators mask them as best they can. If I take the wings of Shahar and fly to the uttermost parts of the earth, even there, you will find me, etc. Wings of Shahar? Well, Shahar was the dawn goddess. That's a proper name, and her wings are the edges of the sun's light coming up over the horizon. She was the same as Eos among the Greeks, and so on and so on. There was her brother Shalman, who was the god of the sunset, and both of these are mentioned. There was Zedek, or righteousness, and Shalom, peace. These are mentioned. It says that the two of them kiss. Well, there were a god and goddess in ancient Jerusalem of the Jebusites. Well, they had these various deities, and there were others still, no doubt. And what happened eventually was they had neighboring pantheons whom they may have recognized, again, simply as the same gods with different names. But eventually you had a couple of developments. One was henotheism, which you mentioned. I think Max Muller came up with that. He called it katenotheism, which is just a longer version of the same thing. It means one God at a time-ism. And the notion was, just like in the Rig Veda, you read one hymn to Indra, the great warrior god who defeated Vritra, just like Jehovah and Leviathan and all that. And he's the greatest of gods. But then you turn the page and you read one to Agni, the fire god. He defeated Rudra. He was the greatest of gods, and so on. Well, the same religion believed in all these gods, but it's like, I call it the I bet you say that to all the gods religion. You're praising a god, so you use the most fulsome language you can, the highest praise is available. You don't think the other god is getting jealous. It's just that's the rhetoric of divine worship. So one god at a time, really it's polytheism. It just explains how they worshipped him. But eventually you had... well, by the way, polytheism could be monarchical. You could have a ruler of your gods, so that El Elyon, God Most High, implies that there are lesser gods who are his sons. The sons of El, they're called, sons of God, mentioned several times as a divine council. And in Deuteronomy 32, it says, if you read it close, that... they understood the sons of God, of which there had to be about 70, to be deputy gods, assigned one each to every nation. And in fact, their number came first. And Elyon divided the human race into nations enough so that each god would have his own fiefdom to rule. And so they believed that the other nations' gods existed. As you see in I think it's the Jephthah story, where he's recruited to lead a war against the Ammonites, but naturally he tries peace overtures first. He sends a letter to the king of the Ammonites and says, look, we have a territorial dispute here. Why can't you be content with the territory that your god, Shamash, has allotted to you? you, and we'll be content with what Yahweh, our God, has allotted to us. And originally Yahweh was simply the one of the sons of God who ruled Israel. But eventually they streamlined all of this. But I'll get to that in just a second. They went from this polytheism with the king of gods to monolatry, just Greek word for worship, latria, of one God. And at this point, apparently, they thinned down the pantheon and said, okay, there's one God of Israel. And, well, I guess that somewhere along the line they did streamline it and fused El Elyon with Yahweh. They had done the same thing next door in Canaan, by the way, because Baal starts to be called Elyon Baal. So apparently it was a trend to combine the two high gods, or the home favorite god, making him the high god. Well, so this would have happened by the time they had attained monolatry. So they're saying, we've got a god, and the others may have gods too, and they would still be the sons of God. But we don't worship them, and they don't worship our God, Yahweh or Jehovah, and we don't expect them to. Well, why is this? How did you decide? Well, what does it say in the Ten Commandments? I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods but me. You see, he's saying, only I deserve your worship. Thoth didn't liberate you from Egypt. It wasn't Dagon. It wasn't Ashur and so forth. No, it was I. And this is why Elijah, for instance, does not like it when King Ahab marries Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, and gets the bright idea of bringing their god, Baal Melkart, a version of Hercules, interestingly, to bring him in to be worshipped too. And Elisha never says in the stories, this God doesn't exist, get him out of here. No, he says, we have no business worshiping this God. Bring him back home. He's not welcome here. And so that's the idea. We owe worship to this God only.
I know Christians will try to run to the place where the battle of the gods takes place and say, see, he calls, your God must be asleep, your God must this. And they'll try to say, well, see, he's trying to imply your God doesn't exist because he didn't have
it could be, but it also equally might just mean, you see, you can't find him here. He's not active. He's not even listening because he's not home. You try this in Phoenicia, maybe you'll have better luck. But he's not the God here, so he ain't here. Oh. It's like when Naaman, the Syrian general whom Elisha cures of leprosy, converts to Yahweh. He owes it to him now. And he says, now, I'm high in the government. I have to bring my doddering master, Joe Biden, the king, into the shrine of Rimmon. I have to do that, even though I now want to worship only Yahweh. Can I have a dispensation? I mean, you see the position I'm in. And Elisha said, oh, yeah, what the heck, no problem. He said, however, another favor you could do me. Can I dig up a couple of mules' burdens of Israelite soil and set up a private chapel to Yahweh? Because, of course, he can only be worshipped on Israelite soil. That's interesting. Talk about God's little acre. And I hope you understand, I'm not ridiculing this. I'm saying this was the thinking back then based on the assumption. Or like when David is exiled. He takes up with Doeg the Edomite, who's some kind of a bandit chief, and he says to Israel, well, you forced me to worship other gods. If I'm exiled, I can't worship Yahweh anymore. I mean, all of this makes sense once you see what the system was. And so they were monolaters. We worship only God. And you're worshiping Shamash. Go do it. And then eventually you read in the writings of the second Isaiah and in Jeremiah actual statements of monotheism. You don't have that in the Ten Commandments. It says, you shall have no other gods but me. It doesn't say there aren't any others. You wouldn't need to bring in you owe me the debt and all that if you were trying to say these other gods are figments of somebody's imagination. But that is what they say in the second Isaiah and Jeremiah. I am God, there is none beside me. There is no other God. I mean, there's no mistaking it there. But that took a while, and of course even more of a while than we thought, since the Old Testament may have been written much later than we thought. And it wasn't, it didn't win the day completely. In Second Maccabees, we learn that some of the Hasmonean troops who were fighting against the Seleucid Empire of Hellenized Syria, they worshipped Zeus and all that stuff, they were gathering the bodies of their fallen soldiers and found that some of them were wearing protective amulets that apparently didn't do much good, dedicated to the gods of Jaffa, which is still around, the Joppa of the New Testament where Peter goes. What? You're fighting against these polytheists from Syria, and you believe in other gods? Yeah, it was always that way. It never caught on completely. There's still hyper-traditionalist Catholics that repudiate Vatican II as if it never happened, and so on. That's just common. You're not automatically going to get everybody to go along with the new program. So it took a long time, and in fact, in some ways, it never went away, as Margaret Barker said. That's why you have all these ions and Gnosticism and two different images of God on top of the Ark of the Covenant, one Jehovah, one Elohim, according to Philo. It didn't just vanish.
And the last thing he mentioned was certain Jewish patriarchs are meant to represent certain deities, and you kind of work backwards in the order of questions, but the last one, is there certain patriarchs that represent certain deities? I mean,
at least I think so. Like, I don't know Hebrew, but I suspect that Zebulun, by the way, there's a town called Zebulun right down the road from us. Zebulun, I think, had to be named for the god Zebul, as in Baal Zebul, who is still around in New Testament times. And Asher, the tribe that Anna is supposed to be from, that has to be the god Asher, who was the chief god of the Assyrians, from whom they got the name. Gad was a god of good luck.
it's hard to believe these names didn't come from something like that. Yeah.
Some of them were just geographical designations, like Ephraim. That wasn't even a personal name at first because of the plural ending. It means those who live on Mount Ephraim. Mount Ephrath, I think. But the people from that tribe had to be given a name, an eponymous, a named patriarch that would be their name. So they figured, okay, they're Ephraimites. Benjamin means the sons of the right hand, I think, because or as we would say, sons of the south, because there's still a country over there called Yemen, and that's the half of the name, the sons of Yemen, Benjamin, and they're way at the south. There's Issachar, which apparently means migrant laborers, and so on. So there were a bunch of different names, and this made a lot of sense on the theory that Israel began as a tribal confederation, that these tribes really had nothing to do with each other, but once they did form an amphictyony, to use a Greek term for similar coalitions around the Mediterranean, that they came up with the idea of saying, we're blood brothers now. So they picked some sort of a mythic hero and said, we're all descendants of him, Abraham, who must have been a moon god originally. Abraham, two variants, both mean the great father. Father of whom? Remember when God says, look at the night sky and see all the stars. Your descendants are going to be like that. Well, in the original myth, those were his descendants. He was the father of all the stars. And Isaac was the son. And the two of them, this attempt to sacrifice him was the sun and the moon competing and all that.
Interesting.
Jacob might be considered to have been a god because he is, when he fights Esau, he's fighting a god, right? Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. The guy fights at the river Jabbok as a god. And so forth. Those are a little less clear, but it seems to me that, yeah, that's what some of them were named for, because the tribe had been named for the god they worshipped.
I don't know if this is a connection, but when Joseph had the dream, dreams, plural, he says that the sun, moon, and stars would bow down to him. There's kind of an implication even in the parable there, in his dream, that his father was the sun figure. Now, of course, it's a dream or parable. I don't know how far you could take it, but Jacob could potentially represent the sun, and his wife.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Esau was the son because of the hair.
Yeah, I'm taking
but
it down to
who
Joseph.
knows?
Like, I wonder if it's a character thing that passes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make nothing of the sun, moon, and stars and all